So how do you take thousands of wines and whittle them down to 10? I'm going to try to do that right now. Since I started my second career in wine, 2022 was the year that I traveled the least. However, I did get the chance to taste in the median range of what I normally taste. Between 4 competitions, multiple press trips, hundreds and hundreds of samples getting sent here, when you add all that together, I tasted over 2,000 wines in 2022. When I just started out in the wine industry, it was really important for me to taste all the benchmarks. I wanted to taste all the big names. So I kind of have that in my belt. I'd have that in my palate memory, in my mind memory. But since I've gotten deeper and deeper into the wine industry, that really matters less and less. And there are so many great wines being made all around the world. It's really hard to differentiate between them. It also depends on what kind of mood you're in, what kind of food that you want to eat. Do you want to have white, red, orange, rosé? There are a lot of factors that go into it. So for my top 10, these are all wines that have some kind of significant memory that's burned into my mind, and that's why these wines stood out among the rest. This is the first year in my wine career where most of the wines I tasted were from more well-known wine-producing countries. The years before, maybe over 50% of wines I tasted were from lesser-known wine-producing regions and countries. You'll notice the lighting's a little bit different in here. I did finally invest in some cinema lighting. Before, I was using a spotlight with some modified Hollywood techniques in terms of diffusion, but I feel like I maxed out that lighting system, and this is what I have. Pretty cool, huh? However, I did film a lot of videos with the old lighting system, so those will be coming out. I think there are about 10 to 12 of those before all the videos start to look like this. These wines are in no particular order. I do have 4 honorable mentions though. First, we have the Chateau de Pommard Clos Monge Micault 2020. This is a Pommard, so it's a village Burgundy, not a cheap wine by any stretch of the imagination. I don't claim myself to be an expert when it comes to Burgundy. I think so few people are. The wines are so expensive. There are so many terroirs to know, and they're rare. They're really hard to get your hands on unless you have deep pocketbooks. There's not a lot of samples that are floating around. Chateau de Pommard sent me a pack of samples, and this is the first one I opened. I did a blind tasting face-off video with another wine. You'll see that coming up soon. But I remember the first smell of it, and I was just impressed. It's exactly what I want in Burgundy. And to me, it was just... Maybe to me it's so memorable because it's a signal I'm kind of growing up in the wine world. Okay, the next honorable mention, the Cantina Gianluigi Deadis Ultana 2013 from Sardinia, Italy. I go to Sardinia once or twice per year, and Sardinia is the land of really unique varieties. This is actually a Bordeaux blend. I was in Sardinia over the summer judging in the Vermentino International Competition. I love that competition. I've done it 3 to 4 times. And during one of the evenings, we were having a seafood feast on this rooftop restaurant. It's the summer, so it's time for white wine, especially with all the seafood. This wine was getting passed around, and I remember sipping on it and thinking, wow, this is really impressive. Generally, in Sardinia, I'm not gonna go for a Bordeaux blend. I'm gonna go for a Cantina de Sardegna, Carignano del Succes, which is my favorite red wine from Sardinia, or a nice, fresh, crispy Vermentino. But this is a wine I just kept going back to, and our table all loved it as well. It turned out I didn't even know the winemaker was sitting at the table next to me. Okay, next up, the Chateau Zeganni Saperavi 2017 from Georgia. Yes, the country of Georgia. I had this a couple evenings before having that Sardinian Bordeaux blend. The first evening that I got to Sardinia, it was kind of downtime, and one of the other judges flew in who was a winemaker from Georgia. She works for this estate, and she brought the Saperavi, made in Quavery, old amphora that are buried underground, traditional Georgian way of making wine, and it was just incredible. Saperavi is just such a unique grape. Plenty of red fruit notes, leather, spice, almost Syrah, even with just maybe a touch more acidity, and not the harsh tannins that sometimes you can get with Syrah. I'm completely blown away because it's been a couple years since I've been to Georgia. Not all wines made in Quavery are clean, which I accept a lot of the times, but this one was squeaky clean. It was fine wine. For me, on the spot, looking back at my notes, I gave it 95 plus. Next up, a Turkish wine, the Nahita Dokya Kalecik Karasi 2020 from Turkey. It's also been a few years since I've been to Turkey. Kalecik Karasi is more of a light-skinned grape. They call it maybe the Pinot Noir of Turkish varieties. I wouldn't go that far, but it does make lighter, easier drinking reds. I've tasted a lot of bad ones as well, but I had this at the Mundus Vini competition back in September. I was judging the competition, got a lot of interesting wines, even made a video about it. Can you trust wine competitions? I'll drop it in the link in the description box. Anyways, this wine came up. We didn't know what it was, obviously. We just know the grape variety. And I gave it gold. Everybody liked it at the table, and the jury went back and forth if we should move it up to grand gold or not. And one of the members of the jury, he's a winemaker from Portugal, he said, look, this wine is so impeccably balanced. It's so well done. Okay, it's not a big, bold blockbuster, but we have to reward it. So we did. If you can find it, it's worth checking out. Okay, here we go. The 10 most memorable wines that I had in 2022. A lot of times you end with the dessert wines, but we're starting with the sweets. First up is the Badia e Coltibuono Occhio di Pernice. This is a great Chianti Classico producer, also well known for making Vinsantos. They make two of them, which they're normal Vinsanto, and then they're Occhio di Pernice, which is made of Sangiovese. Vinsantos are grapes that are picked and they're dried in attics or in straw mats until they become shriveled. They become really concentrated. Then you vinify them into wine. They're high in sugar, and this was just exceptional. I love Vinsanto because it still has the acidity to wipe your palate clean. I was with the Consortio of Chianti Classico. They put together a little private tour for me, take me around to different wineries, and I was with the owner, Roberto. It was early in the morning. I'm sure him, like other winemakers, other wine producers, sometimes get tired of showing wine media, wine journalists around. He was opening some wines for me, and he saw my eyes light up when I tasted the Vinsantos. It turns out he's really passionate about them as well, so then he just opened up completely, and I thought that was a real special moment. Next up, we have one of the greatest wines of the world, in my opinion. We have the Szepsy St. Tamás 6 Petunias 2017. It's a Tokaji Aszú from Tokaji, Hungary. I was in Budapest over the summer judging at the Wine Lovers International Wine Competition. And in addition to the competition, they also had a little bit of a festival. They had some workshops as well. And István Szepsy Jr. was invited to show some of the Szepsy wines. The Szepsy family are known for being the most well-known, maybe the greatest, the most expensive Tokaji in Hungary. Legend has it that their family actually invented the process to make Tokaji Aszú wine. This is a single vineyard from Mad. I've been to this crew before. All the wines I've ever tasted from St. Tamás, no matter the producer, are usually pretty darn good. But this is not a cheap wine. This is hundreds, I mean, maybe $500, $600. So it was really an honor to taste it. Man, sweet Tokaji Aszú, I could drink like it's got the cure inside. So much honey, so much lemon, so much natural gas, so much white pepper type flavors. But the acidity is so crunchy and so fiery that it wipes your palate off clean. Before the pandemic, where it kind of screwed up my travel schedule, I was going to Tokaji a couple times per year. And getting the chance to sit down with István Szepsy Jr., taste through those wines, it just kind of reaffirmed why I love Tokaji so much. I'm a big fan of Hungarian wines. Before I started switching fully over to video, when I was writing, I was actually working on a Hungarian wine book. I launched a Kickstarter, which it failed, and it failed, embarrassingly failed. Next up, the Chateau yquem 1989 from Sauternes, Bordeaux. This is one of the world's great wines. And I know, yes, this is a big name, but this also signified a growing up for me. I was on a Bordeaux trip over in the spring. I actually won this trip years ago in a writing contest, and it kept getting delayed because of COVID, and it finally took place. And on the second evening of the trip, we were invited to Chateau yquem for a cocktail party. It was incredible. The aperitif was the fresh vintage of Chateau yquem. I think it was 2019. Incredible. It was just a magical evening. When we went inside the chateau, there were all the different appellations of Bordeaux, everything from Pauillac, Saint Estèphe, Pommard, with a bunch of old vintages, current releases. We get to taste everything. There were finger foods, live music, and this was so memorable to me because I remember it was early on in the evening and somebody in our group said, you know, Matt, I think some of us want to go. And I just looked and I said, look, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, experience. There are all these great wines here. I'm staying. You guys can figure it out. I'm staying. Turns out they all stayed. However, a lot of people did end up leaving, and at the end of the evening, they poured the 1989 Chateau yquem with desserts, with cheeses. And since I think there were less people than they expected, there was a lot of wine to grow on, I think I drank close to 2/3 of the bottle because it was just an amazing experience. Just being at that estate where the only guests there were a couple of journalists and then owners of different chateaus. Every chateau actually only got one invite, one ticket. I felt kind of like I'd made it in the, even though I've got a long way to go, but I felt like I kind of made it in the wine world. Next up is the Couvent de Jacobins 1982. It's a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru from Bordeaux. Just one evening before that Chateau yquem experience, our group went over to Couvent de Jacobins. It's one of only two, I think, Saint-Emilion Grand Crus that the estate is actually in the village of Saint-Emilion, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I had tasted the wines before and had been really impressed. Merlot-based wines. These wines are not expensive, 30 to 50 bucks around the world. And one of the owners lives part of the time in Singapore, so we had something to bond and talk about since I lived there for 5 years. And we had an incredible dinner that evening after the little chateau visit and after we saw the vineyards. And he prepared a tasting of 6 or 7 different vintages, some off vintages, some great vintages. We were all tasting them blind, and one wine stood out the most to me. And I kept going back to it over and over again. And when it was revealed, it was my birth year, 1982, one of the greatest years in Bordeaux. Not every day you get the chance to sip on 1982 Bordeaux. I'm disappointed with aged reds a lot. I think a lot of times ageability is overstated, but that wine was still very alive. Okay, next up, an evening after the Chateau yquem experience, we went and had dinner at Domaine de Chevalier in Pessac-Léognan in Bordeaux. It's on the left bank, amazing estate. A lot of history there. Had an amazing dinner in this old chateau, this old dining room. Again, we had a bunch of wines that were given to us blind. And as great as Chateau de Chevalier, their red is, I think their greatest wine is the white wine, which you're gonna see in an upcoming blind tasting video. And they gave a couple vintages to us blind, and one just stood out amongst all the rest. We had some older vintages of the red too, like 1970, but the wine that stood out the most when it was revealed was, again, my birth year, the 1982 the Chevalier Blanc. This is a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, barrel fermented. This wine ages tremendously well. I think white Bordeaux is one of the most underrated wines in the world. It is Sauvignon Blanc, but it's not so explosive and limey. The Semillon brings some nice balance in. It always has great acidity. Next up on the list was a wine that I pulled from my own cellar and brought to Mundus Vini in Germany. What happens in these international competitions, a lot of times people are coming from all different parts of the world, so they bring wines from their own country to show off. And during the evenings you get together and you taste them. The European writers, they don't get a chance to taste the high quality American stuff because most of the American wine that's exported is more of the cheaper stuff and then ends up being pretty expensive by the time it gets to Europe. And also the higher quality stuff here in America tends to be sold direct to consumer. It's not widely distributed. And I brought a Liquid Farm Golden Slope 2015 from Santa Barbara County, California. This is maybe my favorite producer of Chardonnay in California and maybe the world. 2015, so it had some age on it, and it smelled like it just hadn't aged at all. It was still incredibly fresh, and I poured it to people. I think there were people, if I remember, from Finland, Denmark, the Netherlands, Portugal, North Macedonia, France, people from all over the world. They smelled it. I could see everybody's eyes lit up. And one of my good friends, he's a Dutch wine importer. I said, "Do you like it?" And he's like, "Yeah, this is not what I expect of typical American wine." It showed incredibly well. I think those wines are still like 40, 50 bucks, relatively underpriced for the quality. Next up on the list is the Durum Tinto 2019 from the Douro in Portugal. After my Bordeaux trip, I went to Portugal for a week. It was kind of like the on premiere of the Douro, where you had some of the best producers there showing their stuff. It was for both trade and journalists. And what happens is there was stand-up tastings, walk-around tastings, but there were also events during the days where we sit down and producer would come table to table and show their wines. and I was just so impressed with this wine. Sometimes Douro Reds can be just a little bit too big, a little too alcoholic for me. This was medium, but I think it's 13.5 alcohol, and it's a wine that sells in Portugal for 12 euros. I think I seen it in the States for about 18 bucks. Medium bodied, juicy, got those real Douro characteristics. You know, if you ever have port, Douro Reds can taste like dry port, obviously, because they're made of the same grapes. A lot of red fruit flavors, a lot of sage type notes, tart, some leather notes. But this was so juicy, and to make that kind of wine with those steep slopes, if you've ever been to the Douro, for me, it's the most spectacular region in the world. I don't know how people work on those slopes because I've been in there many times. In the summer, it is hot. I don't know how you can produce a wine of that quality at that kind of price. In Portugal in general, outstanding wine, get your hands on it. Next up is a wine from Slovenia. That's right, Slovenia. I went to Slovenia for a week press trip, and we were visiting a bunch of cellars, and I knew of this cellar before, but I was completely blown away. This is the Frešer Riesling 2019. Look, I love Riesling, especially German Riesling. Germany is really up here for me. Yes, I love Austrians. I love the Australians. I love some of the stuff that's happening in America. Germany for me is the top. There's a lot of Riesling in Eastern Europe because it was used to make high-yielding, cheap wine that you mix with sparkling water. And now when those Eastern European countries try to make Riesling, because of the old mindset, a lot of times people don't want to buy those wines. There are very few high quality producers in the lesser known wine countries that I really think of. This was incredible. It's a wine I think that in Slovenia is 10, 12 euros. Really, to me, it acted like a Rheinhessen Riesling. Lots of pineapple, lots of yellow peach, lots of pepper, had some slaty notes. We tasted a little mini vertical all the way back to 2015, which was also impressive. I was with a few masters of wine. I was with a few other journalists, and all of us were completely blown away. Next up is a wine that's not going to win any competitions, but to me, it was one of the most memorable experiences of 2022. It's the Michele Simone Schiava. I was in the Valle de Chembra for a festival on Muller-Thurgau. It was a big competition and a festival all around these grapes. By the way, the Valle de Chembra, the slopes are incredible. It's like the Mosel, like the Douro, but you're high up in the mountains. The slopes are like this. It's located in Trentino Alto Adige, which has a fair share of its own unique grapes, and Schiava is one of them. It's a light red wine, makes wines that are about 11.5 to 12% alcohol. That trip was especially memorable to me because I was the only international or English-speaking person on the trip. It was an all-Italian journalist trip, and I remember during one of the evenings we went into this little stonehouse structure, and it opened up and there was charcuterie hanging down, salami hanging down, a long table, went and sat down, and we had just this tremendous, just really traditional, simple, yet hearty Italian meal. And on top of that, there were only a few wines. There was some Muller-Thurgau, there was some Chardonnay, and there was also the Schiava. And on these trips sometimes, because you're tasting lots and lots of wine, sometimes you don't really want to drink in the evening because your mouth is built up with so much acid. But I remember those bottles of Michele Simone Schiava, those were finished off the quickest. I remember a lot of people asking me, hey, could you pass me that? Could you pass me that again? That evening is what wine is all about, sitting down, sharing a meal, sharing laughter, and sharing just good, enjoyable wine, filling up your heart, your mind, your soul. Speaking of which, okay, we're taking it down to the one wine that made me cry this year. This is the Caparsa Docchio a Matteo 2019. It's a Chianti Classico Riserva. Again, I was with the consortium of Chianti Classico for a week, taking me around, showing me the different cellars. And I think this was the third day. I was pretty tired. We were seeing about 4 to 5 cellars per day, tasting wines. You have to sit there, be with the owner. You have to be present, obviously. It takes a lot more energy than you would think. And I was pretty tired. It was the last appointment. But I remember pulling in, and Caparsa is just an incredible estate, small family estate. Paolo is the owner. He does everything, all the farming, all the winemaking, super hands-off, minimal intervention wine. And we were sitting down and he opened about 20 wines for me to taste, and I was blown away by a lot of them. These are more expensive Chianti Classico wines because they're more minimal intervention. They're kind of wines you're going to find more hipster type bars. They're going to be more expensive. This wine I don't think is released till early in 2023 actually. The wines that made me cry in my life, a lot of people say, oh, I want to taste that wine. And you gotta understand, just because the wine hits me that way doesn't mean it's gonna hit you the same way. To me, it was a culmination of everything. Me being super exhausted, blown away with the wines, seeing this guy that was so passionate, kind of reminded me of my father, who's a farmer. His hands were all dirty because his hands were really in the soil, producing this just beautiful wines. And that's what brought the emotion, the tears to my eyes. Those are moments that make me realize, that's why I'm doing this in the first place. So that's my list. I'd love to hear from you. What were your 10 most memorable wines of 2022? Drop it in the comments below. Thanks a lot. I'll see you soon.